might talk about our course, Intro to Open RAN Security. Okay. So why security? No? This is RAN that was designed with security in mind. No? In the early days, of course, everyone wants to make it work. No? Now we are designing systems, no? Especially with uh, the criticality of telecommunications, no? To have security built in. No? And shift left, no? By design, even in the design stage, security is also already being discussed. Um, the discussion here includes risk assessments, threat modeling, challenges, no, affecting open RAN components and interfaces, and some recommended best practices and frameworks, no, such as the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, CIS Critical Security Controls, among others. So we'll be discussing here this morning, no, ORAN threat modeling, security controls and risk, zero trust architecture, NIST Cybersecurity Framework, sa CIS, and summarizing up in the key learning points, no, and some listings of my references for the course. So Open RAN security, no, and in that sense, no, what does open mean in Open RAN? So the main goal for using Open RAN is to have an interoperability standards for RAN elements. No, they want basically to be able to have the freedom, no, to choose the best hardware and software implementation or module, no, for RAN environment, and not to rely, no, on a single vendor. Basically to make the supply chain robust, and you're not gonna be vendor locked in to uh, to whatever RAN vendor, no, you have agreed upon. Now you have a lot of choices, and each and every module is interchangeable, no, with a different vendor. Um, not though, no, had introduces, no, an issue in security na before it was end-to-end, it's a single vendor that's going to be responsible for all of it. Now you have a lot of different vendors, no, that needs to be able to talk to each other aside from securing themselves, no, from each other. And with that, no, looking at the name of Open RAN. Open refers to the intentional capability, the software, hardware, and interfaces, no, to comply with an agreed upon standard. Um, and it uses, no, a lot of open source software. Open source hardware is also factored in, but the Open RAN may be uh, intention to be open for interfaces. No, does not necessarily mean that Open RAN would use all open source. No? That's not like the case. No? The Open RAN mainly pertains to interoperability. No? So you cannot, they're doing away, no, with vendor locked in. So this is going to be published. This is going to be uh, for public's review and implementation of different vendors. So hence the open interfaces. So as mentioned, no, ORAN Alliance wants to impart that Open RAN is not necessarily open source. While there is a huge, no, deployment, a huge component of Open RAN would be running likely in open source. Uh, it's not mandated, no, to use open source. You could be a vendor and developing your own proprietary system. And you could have libraries, no, and components that uses open source. Hence, why would you reinvent the wheel? No? So let's say you are an AI or machine learning vendor. Uh, We don't expect you to develop your own web server, no, or your own kernel, no, for that matter, no, to include it in your product. No? It's guaranteed, no, that you will most likely be using current, no, kernels. You might improve upon it, no, and develop your own software for it, no, but you don't have to build it from the ground up. But as stated, no, with ORAN Alliance, Open RAN is not necessarily open source. So current state in ORAN security, threat modeling is the most and remediation analysis. This is the most mature documents that we have in ORAN. There's also requirement specification. It's mature but still in progress. protocol specification, if you could see, the focus would be in TLS, DTLS, SSH, IPsec. A lot of this has to do with encryption, no, of communications in transit. So they are doing away with legacy protocols that's not encrypted. All communications within Open RAN is encouraged, no, to pass or be encapsulated with the security or encryption like TLS, DTLS, SSH, and IPsec. Test specification is in progress, but there's a good end-to-end, no, security test, end-to-end testing document. It's still in progress, but what's good about this is, aside from interoperability, they also considered security in that documentation. So here is a list of ORAN components, no, and their security mechanisms, and if there's a documented uh, specification, no. So most of these are available today. Others, yeah, this has been a dated table, no, but most of this has already been published, no, for the consumption of researchers and future vendors in Open RAN. So there is a reading, since this is an Aora course, no, a lot of this is, well, we have white papers and technical documents na need to read, no? So this is an intro into Open RAN security in 5G, made by the Open RAN Policy Group, no? You could read on this, it's just a 4-pager, no? Estimate this maybe half hour, no, to uh, read and understand. And for the course, no, we want the students to create a 1-pager key highlights and takeaways from this documentation, just for them to have their feet wet, basically, in Open RAN security, in 5G. But next is we have a bit lengthy document, no? NIS Cooperation Group published, no, a report on cybersecurity of Open RAN, which is also an eye-opener, no? And this one, it's a 31-pager. Estimate maybe, since a technical document, around 2 hours of discussion or of reading. Now, for ORAN security risk, we do have expanded threat surface, no? Because unlike before that, you would be talking to a single vendor and they own the hardware, they own the software, they do the integration. Now you have multiple vendors, no, in your RAN environment, and uh, mm, there might be different levels of security testing, no, per vendor, and you might not be aware of. No? So hence, part of ORAN security risk and recognized security risk is, well, there is now an expanded threat surface, no? Because you now would be talking to and implementing a solution from various vendors. No? There's also a need, no, to close security vulnerabilities associated with the near real-time RAN intelligent controller. There's also address, not to trust chain introduced by decoupling of functions. So this is what I mentioned before, that there are multiple vendors within your RAN chain. No? When we decouple this because of Open RAN, no? Where we want to break the cycle of vendor lock-in, there is a corresponding issue naman in security risk, no? Where now you have, again, multiple vendors that might not have the same level of security. So it's you're still gonna be the one responsible for it. No? I also want to ensure management interfaces are secured, no, according to industry best practices, and we have a lot of those frameworks going to be discussed towards the end of the talk. Then we want to, of course, since Open RAN would be using a lot of open source components, no, practice a higher level of due diligence, no, for exposure to public exploits from use of open source. No? And this list actually came from Ericsson. And yeah, they do recognize, no, that open source means, but anyone could read the source code, no, and anyone could also easily discover vulnerabilities, no. But that's on the flip side of the coin, no, if you discover vulnerabilities, on one side, you could easily secure it now. You have the source code also, you could contribute the fix. On the flip side, not that actors would have access to the source code, and they would also be able to find vulnerabilities, and they might not disclose it to the public and use that to attack various system, including your RAN environment. So first, of course, if we want to assess the risk, we want to do threat modeling. Where this on a threat modeling document for Open, they have identified assets, so major module, where 30 data interfaces, data and interface assets, were identified with that component assets. They also identified threats, threats against ORAN, threats against OCloud, threats to open source software, threats to physical, threats to against radio networks, and threat against machine learning. So they already have identified that. They also need to identify the various stakeholders, the MNOs, the tech providers, tech admins, integrators and testers, and what attackers now they're expecting. Of course, we have the cyber criminals, cyber terrorists, activists, nation state level, advanced persistent threats, and of course the more common insider threat. And when we say insider threat, it could be both malicious and unintended insider threat, where maybe an admin was configuring something, but inadvertently causing outage, or worse, deleting a component of or a virtual machine, causing outage that's not gonna be easily recoverable. And they weren't intentionally doing it. No? There was an accident, or uh, they weren't skilled enough to maintain it, and still, as an admin, you could cause huge damage. And um, on the other side, it could be an insider threat that, like a disgruntled employee or someone that needs monetary compensation, and a threat actor was able to find them, and offered them cash, in exchange for an access inside the radio access network, and that's considered a collusion between maybe a cyber criminal or a nation state APT and an internal employee. We also identified security measures, inside threat modeling documentation, inside requirement specification documents, protocol specification documents. Then next would be risk assessment level. No? So if they have identified all of this, they would categorize the risk, to low, medium, and high severity. And of course, if it's a high risk, there should be a corresponding compensating control, to uh, minimize the risk, and ensure, that it is within the acceptable limits. As for us in security, ultimately the basic goal is to do risk management, and minimize the risk. Um, so let's go with the threat modeling diagram. So here, this is how we're mapping it, from our data assets. We identified 30. We map it to 12 ORAN components and ORAN interfaces. Then we want, to determine, and identify, is it at rest, is it in transit, the data across these components, is it at rest, is it in transit, and what are the protections, against confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and privacy. And then since this is the asset now we want to protect, now we want to check what are the ORAN threats and all other threats, and basically have a threat to asset mapping here. So you got the threats being mapped to, are they really a threat that's likely to occur, and they have access to those interfaces. So map it to the attackers. Then we have vulnerability description, and identify what data assets are affected, and corresponding components. And once we have that, no, we would now be doing threat to risk mapping, where we identify that threats likelihood to occurrence, no, and do an impact description, and then what's the risk type, no? Is it confidentiality, integrity, availability? Uh, Not included here, no, but should be also considered is authenticity and privacy. And then identify the risk level, high, medium, low, and again, map it out with the corresponding data assets and affected components. So that basically the risk level, no? If you want to identify it and level it up, no? You need to now start identifying then um, the risk type and the risk level, and maybe how much of the system would be affecting in case anything goes wrong with that or in case that risk occurs. And what's the impact on the synchronization and the number of ODUs and ORUs, no, that's gonna get affected with that risk occurring. So there's this organization, BSI from Germany, that performed the ORAN risk analysis, and this is gonna be a reading tool for the course, no? And they have done this from the multiple perspective. One is victim's perspective for the risk analysis, where you're a victim, either you're an end user, maybe a mobile phone or smartphone user, no? As with most of our users gonna be ending up with, or are you a state in society, no? That needs the service of that telecom operator. Okay. Or you're practically the telecom operator. So these are the possible victims of any disruption or attack against Open RAN. And from the attack perspective, no, who would they be? The source, no, could be an end user, no, so, one with a mobile phone end user, no, could be attacking the RAN network. That's also a possibility. Maybe an outsider, no, from the organization, um, insider, employee, or whatever, no, as long as they have access, it could be considered insider. Uh, RAN service provider, no, could also be a source of an attack, no? Or technically a victim itself too. There's also cloud service provider, since while cloud is generally more secure, no, there could still be an issue, no, where they are breached and they are now attacking your RAN components, since there's a lot of clamor, no, for Open RAN components to be mainly deployed in the cloud. Well, of course, you cannot deploy the antenna in the cloud, no? But any component that, for that matter, that could be cloudified would be recommended to be cloudified. So also security measures, sorry, assets, no? Will have identified assets, on cloud, interfaces, apps, and machine learning assets. Then, as mentioned, for the targets, no? They have uh, conducted the risk analysis based on confidentiality, integrity, availability, authenticity, and privacy. So in security, you have always maybe seen the CIA, the confidentiality, integrity, availability. But on Open RAN, they have included authenticity and privacy as part of the targets, no? Because at this day and age, no, privacy is a main consideration, no, especially for communication technologies. And of course, you want to, of course, conversation might be private, no, but the one you're talking to, the other end might not be authentic, no? Could be a spoof or what, no? So they also need to consider the authenticity here. For security measures, two definitions or two groups at least are pushing, no? Various security measures across all of those identified assets, targets. We got 3GPP and ORAN. And also, as based on BSI, they have used the risk assessment severity, like a low, medium, and high. So this approach measures the risk for a victim type when an attacker aims at a certain target of which an asset that is or is not protected by security controls. And they have in the document they have a lot of this um I wouldn't say spreadsheet but this I call this identifiers like a stoplight protocol where uh they would map it out like here from the perspective of the stakeholder. They would consider attackers like outsider, user, and insider, and they have this victims end user, state, and network operator, and each and every one of those would have their own protection goals. And let's say from this they would identify if the attacker is outsider, what could we actually or how good are we at protecting that? So you could see here some greens in outsider, no? From our regular users, there's also still some greens, but from an insider, no, you could see that everything is almost in the red, no? Which means that if an insider starts attacking from the perspective of the stakeholder, there's really little at this point for them to be able to uh, defend themselves. No? But at least for the network operators, they do have some control since there are some yellows here from the insiders' point of view. If they're attacking, no? They might not be able to breach confidentiality that much. No? We have some yellows, some reds, no? But integrity, it's all yellows. But for availability, since maybe a denial of service attack is easy to perform, no? If I cannot attack the confidentiality and read the message, even as an insider, no? Since it's encrypted, it's protected, but it's still gonna be very easy for an insider to cause disruption in availability. Because they could redirect network, flood the network, they're already inside anyway. And so yeah, this gives us a mapping on where you are weak at depending on the attacker's type, no, and what they are attacking. You could see the weakness, and of course you want to identify controls, especially on those areas where uh, the stakeholder is weak, no? And put resources there, or maybe at some point, no, if there's really no protection against it, no, you would just have to do a risk acceptance, no, that it's an acceptable risk. The likelihood of it occurring is maybe low, and it's gonna be just part of doing business and operating on a radio access network. So, but this is a very comprehensive document. It's actually long, no? I have a link here. If you want to read it from bsibund.de. They have the 5G RAN risk analysis. No? This document reports this type of table for all assets belonging to OCloud, interface, app, and machine learning category. So there's a lot more. It's just a sample of it. For the course, this is a required reading. This is a bit technical. So estimating maybe 4 to 5 hours of reading. No? It's a 79-page document, but it's a very good one to for you to have a feel based on an audit done by BSI from Germany, no? How they think Open RAN would fare against all of these categories. So let's go to service management and orchestration. What are the top risks for it? So for SMO, top risk is the leakage of network information data, the configurations, topologies, network KPIs, and OCloud KPIs. So this information are uh, mandated to be confidential. So anyone an outsider who would, or even insider that doesn't have any authorization to have this kind of data, that could gain access to it could cause catastrophic issues. No? So this must be protected. No? And for SMOs, um, leakage of this network information data is not an option. So it should have been protected. And if someone is trying to attempt not to access it, you should already be alerted. No? And someone should be monitoring for those alert and protect it accordingly. No? But ideally, you'll have control that prevents it. No? But in security, we do have a saying no? that Um, Prevention is ideal, no, but detection is a must since not a lot of attacks could have been prevented. But the moment something wrong is going on, you should be able to detect it and figure it out that yeah, it's an attack, it's a misconfiguration, or whatever, no, and then act accordingly to remediate that issue. Any risk on those, no, could cause service denial, degradation, and control. So ORAN functions, descriptors tampering, configuration tampering, attacks from SMO to OCloud, and attacks, no, from SMO to ORAN function. So again, you don't want anyone that's not authorized to have access to this information, or they could cause these kinds of for SMO security controls, no? This is a data storage protection list that they are advocating. It's the encryption of sensitive data, both in transit and at rest. No? So you've seen the protocols being mandated a while ago, like TLS, most likely for data transmission or data in transit. And then you got SSH, which is encrypted secure shell for accessing terminals of various components in Open RAN, no? And IPsec, no, for any network communication. Hence, anyone who would have no access to the network and try to sniff data, no, by virtue of Open RAN standards, no, everything would be encrypted. So unless they would have the key, and ideally they won't, even if they could see the network traffic, no, it's not gonna be something that's of value to them. But everything's gonna be encrypted anyway. And they want, of course, no, for data storage protection, restricted per function access to the data buckets. Access control, it is mandatory for RAN, no, to have strong password policies and multi-factor authentication. So they are not advocating to just username and passwords, no, for access. If the system is capable, no, they are highly recommending to use MFA, especially for services that is publicly exposed or maybe an interface outside the RAN environment. Now, of course, internally, no, there could be API calls that would not be possible, no, for MFA because it's programmatically being done. Then you could use maybe a very strong password, or at that point, no, maybe we could call it passphrase. No? It's going to be a very lengthy, very complex credential, no, for authentication that's not going to be easily brute forceable in case they even got the hash of that password. And of course, perform least privilege, no, with role-based access control and access-based access control. Then for software artifacts and lifecycle, that you want to contain and control, no, the supply chain. Also version controls, um, safe continuous integration, continuous deployment practices, and anti-tampering, no, techniques, meaning digital signatures. No? So sample here would be supply chain. You're developing softwares and system. No? You want to ensure that the version that you're using is the latest with the recent maybe patches, no, from the uh, open source libraries or softwares na you would be using, or even third-party proprietary softwares, no? And most likely it's they would this vendors, no, would, or this software providers would have some level of guarantee, no? But still up for you to the implementer, no, to determine the security. So you would have to do your own testing. And basically this is an inventory, part of an inventory where in case let's say sometime in the future you deploy the product, you're using a various libraries, no, and combination of proprietary and open source, and then maybe 2 years down the line, no, we have an issue like the log4j vulnerability last 2022, no. Now you should have a manifest list, no, of what libraries and versions, no, you are using, no, for your product, and you could identify easily, no, that yeah, we are affected, and we should start, no, testing, no, the current patch, the current version, so that we could deploy it to our customers that's using our product. Because if not, um we got a lot of those vendors, no, not necessarily in OpenRAN, no. If you recall the issue with Log4j, no, so apparently it's a Java library that could cause code execution on an older version. It's now patched, but there were a lot of vendors or software vendors that have been using it, that even they themselves now did not realize that they were using Log4j. Okay, so when the initial bug exposure that was put out in public, you could see a page, no, of various products and version that is being updated every hour, because they're just figuring out what other products are affected with the Log4j vulnerability, no, as they go along. And even a month after, no, they're still discovering softwares, no, that have been using Log4j pala in the back end, they are still affected. Okay. They also have here, no, anti-tampering techniques and digital signatures, because we would most likely be dealing with firmware updates, no, and we want those components, no, to be able to validate that any firmware updates that's gonna be flashed into them uh, is coming from the actual vendor, no, that created that module, no. Hence digital signature comes into play, no, that software is signed by the vendor and the system should accept it because it's assigned firmware, no, before updating. You don't want the issue where a threat actor gaining access to the update interface, being able to flash their own firmware and practically taking control of the system and hiding their actual presence, no. Because, well, not a lot of security controls could be done to detect, no, a threat actor that's living in the firmware. It's again, it's way above the typical operating system. No, they could hide there, and there are cases. No, there are vulnerabilities like in the UEFI or other firmware, no, that have been known to be a hiding place, no, for threat actors. And they don't want that. And hopefully, at least, no, it's not foolproof. There could still be an issue where a threat actor compromise, no, the actual organization uh, that coded, no, that firmware, and either steal their digital certificates, so the threat actor could sign their own certificates, which has happened in the past, or maybe integrate themselves, no, into the CI/CD process and inject their own backdoor, so that when the company, no, build their own firmware, no, and they haven't realized that there's already a backdoor in it. The moment they deploy that new firmware to their clients, no, backdoor included. And maybe a good example of this one would be the recent, no, in Linux there is a compression utility called XV. Apparently a threat actor was able, no, to inject its backdoor. But it was almost 4 years, no, in the making, where they were contributing this they were thought to be nation state level threat actors, and they were contributing various improvements, no, on that utility, and then eventually they injected the backdoor just recently, just this year. I think just this month. And it was only discovered because Microsoft engineer, no, had issues where he detected that his SSH logins were a bit slower by half a second. I'm not sure who would be able to detect that, but he was able to detect that. Okay, my SSH session used to be this fast. Now it's a half a second slower, and that's when he started investigating and found out the backdoor, no, for that XButility, which I would say it's a very very nice find, no? And I wouldn't know anyone else, no, who would detect a half a second slowdown in SSH that could lead to discovery of a backdoor. But those things happen. And all that threat actors years work, no, 4 years actually, down the drain within a few days, no, because one guy was very adamant, no, that why is my SSH having a half a second delay. Interesting read. Take a look at that, no, XV vulnerability, if you want to learn more details about that supply chain attack. And guess what? No? OpenSSH is being used by not only Open RAN, a lot of enterprise. So that in the future, that would also be an issue here. Okay. So orchestration risk, ORAN does not want to and cannot now replicate the work done by other SDOs no, regarding orchestration. So they want uh, mention no, European telecommunication standards, NFV frameworks, and Open Network Automation Protocol, ONAP, no, framework no, for RAN orchestration and slicing. And the attacks related to orchestration can be sophisticated as to manipulate the service logic no, or aim service degradation or worse, no, denial of service if they would be able to attack this. And they're targeting basically the automation aspect of Open RAN. So that. Next, threat in OCloud, OCloud implementations, no, they follow several models. No? You could have a private telco cloud, you got hyperscaler edge cloud, you got hybrid models, or uh, some components will be on private, a lot of components will be on public cloud, or vice versa. So even when sticking to let's say network function foundations, no, this would be requirement. So again, computing infrastructure where the host and OS, host OS and the container needs to be part of a secure deployment uh, process. VM should also be isolated, considering identity access management and user and application level, no? And resource identification and authorization. For the data, again, we need to protect the data at rest and in transit. So at rest, sorry, been discussing in transit for quite some time this morning. No? But the at-rest one would be, let's say, you have a database, no, and someone had access to that. Uh, all those information should be encrypted at rest. No? Maybe a basic example here would be maybe a laptop no, of the engineers. It at this point, no, it would be mandatory to have a full disencryption of that critical laptops. No? And even our day-to-day laptops already have most of them will have a built-in encryption now. Wherein if we do lose no that laptop, someone steals it or we left it somewhere no, and it got lost now while in being shipped. Hopefully you don't have any confidential data for that no, while it's being shipped. No? But just in case, um, you if there is a protection at rest, you are now just worried about um the hardware cost, no? And not the data getting leaked out. No? That's the most important part. Yeah, it still hurts, no? Because you lost maybe 150,000 peso laptop, no? But it's worse, no? If you lose a laptop that's not encrypted and someone, no? Maybe intentionally wanting that laptop to get other keys, no? Or information about your RAN environment or enterprise environment, they would be able to easily have access to it because they would just mount the hard drive to another computer and read the disk. With full disk encryption, basically complying with protection for data at rest, then they would need the key. Hopefully, the key or the password to access it. It's not something that's easily guessable. No, you got password policy to prevent you from inputting basic credentials there. No, so this is actually good. No, and not only applicable to Ora, no, even on other enterprise system, no, even personal system. Actually, I think for networking, they are recommending, especially in cloud, no, to have separation of network segments and slices. So this is a common issue that I usually see no, in environment where let's say they would have some sort of separation for maybe a publicly facing server in the DMZ. You got the enterprise network in a private segment. You got the workstation segments. No? But for this one, no, we want it to be more granular, meaning uh, if you have various servers in the DMZ, it's still ideal to do micro segmentation, where uh, maybe if you have 100 servers there, uh, not all of them are part of the same system. I mean, well, it's part of the RAN deployment, no? But maybe 5 servers of those are for identity access management. Maybe an additional 10 servers for those are for service management orchestration, no? Which typically doesn't necessarily need, no, to have full communication amongst each other, no? So the recommendation is zero trust. You might want to separate them, no, on their own contained network, and just open up specific services, let's say for the orchestration servers that might need to talk to the IAM servers, no, but maybe specific, maybe LDAP yeah, protocol. That's the only protocol that you're gonna allow between these two um, networks, no, to communicate amongst each other, no. But that means they have to be isolated. That traffic needs to pass through a router, no, and a firewall eventually, no, to do the filtering for communication to occur. And any violation thereof would trigger, no, an exemption, and it's gonna alert, no, why, let's say, why is uh the orchestration servers not attempting to SSH, not to the IAM servers, which should not be the case. It should be, well, the maintainers and from the IT networks gonna do the SSH. So it might be a legit process na, but if it wasn't identified on deployment, then this is gonna be a violation. Why? Because we're only allowing initially LDAP to talk for them to talk to amongst each other, no, passing through a firewall. Now someone's trying to SSH, no, into one segment to another. So that note, they also are advocating active protection, meaning if there's again a violation, maybe some systems could do auto containment, no? That this, let's say the SSH hasn't really occurred, no, and it wasn't part of the rules since the deployment, no, and then maybe 6 months after, no, there's a SSH traffic from orchestration to IAM. The active protection might do self-containment, no, that would now just but not cause service disruption, no? But if you could some sort of do active protection on some non-critical servers, no, we could already isolate it for investigation, or maybe trigger, no, a process containment, no, within the host, no. If you have an endpoint detection and response, no, they could easily identify who did the, or which process, no, did the SSH, and then shut it down and start investigation. Okay. There's also software life cycle, no, from OS to network functions, um, starting from boot and during DevOps cycle. There's also awareness and countermeasures, no? So event logging analysis, Open RAN wants each and every component to generate logs as detailed as possible. But within acceptable limits, no, you don't want to have a debug mode, no, where each and everything that's being done is gonna get logged. So typically, you'll have to identify for developing a component for Opera, no, develop and identify the necessary logs, and then of course with any systems, no, you'll have various log levels. Where if it's in operations, no, you got the critical and the errors, no, might needs to be logged. Maybe some authentication mechanism. It's not considered critical, no, but it is used for security, so you might want to turn specifically that or any abnormal behavior of the system, no? Maybe temperature spiking up, or a network traffic spiking up, no, or a violation of the host firewall um, could generate logs and should be logged actually. And the current deployment for various networks right now would require you to have what we call SIM platform, no? Where it's a log aggregator with some intelligence on it, and all modules, all components would be sending their logs to that same platform, and then now you'll have a single server, no? Or most likely a cluster of servers for that matter, be able to search, no, and make sense of what logs are happening, no? Or could even have some basic rules like least frequently occurring logs, no, that this log I haven't actually seen, no, since the RAN deployment was in place, no? So you might want to investigate that. Why is that log now starting to appear? No? So again, for Open Run modules, no, and components, we want them to generate logs and send them to a log aggregator, a SIM. And this SIM would typically be on a protected network segment. So the last thing you want is someone, no, who had access to your RAN network, gaining access to your SIM and basically deleting the logs. No? So the last thing you want is for your logs to disappear, no, in a cyber attack. So you would want to keep them separate as much possible from your RAN operations, no, but still be able to receive those logs. And in the case, knock on wood, something goes wrong, attacker had access maybe to a lot of your servers, no, the same component should not be accessible from that segment, no? And most likely you should be using different credentials, no, with MFA for you to be able to log in and view the SIM. And with that, no, you would be using this to do inspection, detection, and do the appropriate protection for the RAN environment. So for OCloud, no, ORAN Security Focus Group has released this study on security for OCloud 2.0. It's 95 pages, but it's technical, but it's very good. It's a very good read, I would say. O1 interface. So for this one, let's say for the O1 interface, we have documentation on what's actually the scope, no, of O1 interfaces and the security controls, no, provided for it. What you could see here is for the O1, no, it's used for provisioning, fault supervision, performance monitoring, and others. No? But for the security controls, it's standard, no, for the protection for confidentiality, integrity, availability. They are recommending for you to use TLS or SSH, no, whatever's needed there. And as mentioned, no, they don't need to reinvent the wheel for a new encryption or a security protocol. TLS does work, SSH does work, so why develop one from scratch that hasn't been vouched, no, by the community for quite some time? But TLS and SSH, they have been robust and being used um, for quite some time now, no? And it is an accepted na security protocol. Now, identifying the risk for O1 interface, of course, you got denial of service from attacks to provisioning. No? If they're starting to do uh, attacking O1 interfaces, it could cause disruption and eventually leads to denial of service. Maybe a misconfiguration or a faulty API could lead to leakage, no, of sensitive information like performance data related, no, to run elements, or degradation from the rec functions from O1 and data manipulation. And they also identified here, no, the data complexity for this one is medium severity, where you would typically need access, no, to that network segment for you to be able to attack the O1 interface, in which case typical external attackers would not have that kind of access. No? So that's why they peg data complexity to medium. No? Because if it's a public interface that's accessible from the internet, well, they would easily tag this as a low complexity. So this is when you look at attack complexity, uh, the higher the better. If it's high, that means it would take the attacker, no, an awfully large amount of resource, no, for them to be able to perform that attack. If the attack complexity is low, meaning even a script kiddie would be able to likely not perform that attack and cause disruption to your RAN environment. Next is O2 interfaces. This one is has something to do with inventory, monitoring, provisioning, software management, life cycle. No? And if you could see, no, still, no, their protection for uh, confidentiality, integrity, availability, minimizing and disabling replay for that matter would just be TLS. No? Again, it's a standard one. And you want, oops, you want protection, no? Ideally against denial of service from attacks to infrastructure. Um, you want to minimize the risk na from degradation of RIC functions from O2 data manipulation. And if you could take a look at this, no, the attack complexity is low/medium. No? So this one is, I would say, more on the risky side because it's highly likely to occur. Some attacks here are not ORAN specific, no, but rather IT oriented. No? But a lot of interoperability within RAN environments are happening in APIs anyway. So via web call. So that would also be considered. Rigs and apps, service denial or degradation against user end devices, no, or wholesales. No? So you got possible altered policies, altered use of enrichment information, adversarial machine learning or machine learning data poisoning, no, for the non-real-time rig. Conflict injection against X apps and GNBs near real-time rig. Exploitation of malicious apps access control, no, to influence other apps, no. And do have oops, weird. User end devices and network data sniffing. But typically it's going to be contained, no, to the end user device or within the small geographical location. They want to sniff data. Um, Even the presence, no, of UE identifiers alone, no, they could lead to UE tracking. No? So they could locate your location, track your location. Leaking of network data, leak of machine learning data. No? This would be, I would say, high value. So what are the protection against those, no, for the rigs and apps? We do have strong authentication, no, for password policies. We could do a very good password complexity with a minimum number of length of passwords and a combination of characters and alphanumeric characters, special characters, and of course, using multi-factor. You need also to have strong access control, least privilege, role-based access control, resource and app isolation would be a thing here. For software level security, even the boot up, no, they are requiring you to have a secure boot where those firmware, no, needs to be validated even on boot up. Because the last thing you want is have an unsigned firmware booting up your system and basically taking control, no, even before the OS starts up. Um, Highlighted here, open source software disk control, your software inventory process, as what we've discussed with the log, similar to log4j issue. You got strong patching process. No, once you deploy an IT system and a RAN system, no, there would be updates, feature wise or security wise. No, so patching should be considered, especially in the rigs and apps. No, and I think, yeah, for patching, no, this is a dirty job. No one wants to do it, but someone has to do it. Otherwise, you end up in the news. No, if there's a vulnerability that you haven't considered patching, no, because it's in production, you don't have a redundant system to test it. That's gonna be catastrophic. You need to be able to do it. You need to also have protected software repositories where you get your updates and apps, no, that you're gonna be deploying or even on the testing level. And the thing that we've noticed, no, is those systems under development are typically the most insecure ones. And there are a lot of attacks, no, that are started, no, as a breach on the dev and UAT environment. Because not a lot of security guys are or have control over those, and it's under the control of the QA and the dev, no? And for them, they just want to make it work for now. And the reasoning is, well, it's not in production anyway, so not a lot of data. We should be protected. But the problem is there's minimal isolation between dev, UAT, staging, and the prod. So if someone breaches UAT and dev, they would be easily able to laterally move, no, to prod, no. Let's say easy is relative, but those codes, no, would most likely be 99% the same as in prod if you're already doing, let's say, UAT, no. And there might be keys and credentials, no, embedded on those or logic issues, no, that dev and QA haven't tested, no. But that actor would be able to realize that, and once they see, no, the code in UAT staging, they would be able to use it to attack prod. System level security strategies, no, for service survival in case of ORAN services unavailability, meaning maybe handover of the load, or they could spawn up other VMs, no, to handle if there's, let's say, denial of service or just a barrage of requests, no. With cloud, it's easily doable. You could easily scale. That's not easy to do on bare metal deployments previously. Um, Also have for system level security, you need to have conflict resolution policies at play. Then for data level security, again, there's a repeat here of encryption at rest, no, and strongly access controlled data buckets. So next we have how do you enforce security, no, in ORAN? They're recommending for penetration testing. You need to do penetration testing in a deployment, either end-to-end, no, once you have deployed it, or maybe modular, no. If you're deploying a system, it's gonna be part of your open or upgrading it to something else, no. It has to pass through penetration testing, no. And this is not a regular just a VA scan, no. Use a tool like Qualys or Nessus, scan your systems, and the result would be if there's any critical vulnerabilities, fix it. No? This is gonna be, I would say, a lot of this would be manual based, since the usual vulnerability scanners typically would automate a lot of this stuff, no. But a lot of the issues now we have encountered when doing product and systems testing, no? A lot of the issues have something to do with logic checks, no? That apparently uh, automated vulnerability scanners is having a hard time detecting. And aside from that, let's say in OpenRun, a lot of these are communicated via API calls. No, they will not have these vulnerability scanners will not have a way, no, for them to discover the format, no, of an API call. You have to input it to them. You have to do it manually. Most likely, you'll have to do it manually and manipulate those calls. No, and while supposedly automated is more efficient because it's fast, no, by experience, again, a lot of this would have to be done manually for now. No, there are products in the market that hopes to automate this, but they're not there yet. Hopefully in the future, no, it's gonna be easier, but I'm not foreseeing that in the near future. I mean, uh, it's still gonna take a long time for them to be able to automate this stuff. Next is ORAN wants you to detect, no, any issues, no, log all key events in both OS and application level, deploy knowledge-based analytics for an attack detection. What do we mean here? We want saying, no, it's a bit okay, no, to overlog and have the data there when you need it, no, rather than not log and then there's an issue and then you cannot figure out what happened. So if it's a choice between minimizing log to overlogging, as long as I have resources, I'll go with overlogging. And then, of course, we're not just collecting logs. No, we want some analytics running on it that's automated and baseline already. So, if let's say on a typical day, you have or typical R, no, maybe your threshold is maybe will have maybe 100 invalid logins. No? So that's common. No? You got a bit some of these employees forgot their passwords. Within an hour, 100 would be okay. But if you breach that threshold, no, at some point you have a 2,000 invalid logins within an hour, that is an indicator of an attack because that's not how your network usually operates. No? That could easily trigger a rule, you know, and report it back to an analyst that monitors that, and you'll have uh, an alert, no, that something weird is going on, and you need to investigate. No? You might want to check it out because for all you know, no, it could have just been a script that was misconfigured or was deployed in the past and someone updated the password, no? And that script wasn't updated, no? Hence you have a invalid login. But now you'll have the logs to figure out which machine was trying to log, and then investigate that machine, and then likely you'll find out that it's just a script. But if it's maybe a workstation, no, that doesn't have a script in the first place and started trying to attempt, no, to log in to multiple systems, but they don't know the password, no, so they're trying to brute force it, then that spike of invalid logins, no, would trigger a threshold, no, and have an alert generated. And worse, no, maybe you could put an alert that, okay, if I see an IP address with multiple invalid logins, maybe if you don't want the 1,000, maybe let's say 20 invalid logins, and then suddenly there is a valid login, I would change, no, the alert, no, from a possible brute force to likely successful brute force, and with a lower threshold, no? So for the analyst to have tag it also, no, via the app to as a critical alert. So they have to analyze it quickly. So again, you could mix and match those use cases for this one. But you could only do that if you are logging these specific events. Want to protect? So we'll have some quick discussions on the CIS now and NIST in a bit, and Zero Trust too. You would need proactive controls, no, for protection, no? Firewall, WAF, IPS, but do not, especially for firewall. The firewall here is considering layer 3 and layer 4 filtering and protection in OSI network layers. WAF would be application-based firewall, no? Which would want to hopefully, no, defend you against application attacks. And IPS, intrusion prevention system, if it sees an exploit traversing the wire, it could block it. Could be a host-based also, no? An exploit arriving at a host, they could block it. But do note, no, WAF, firewall, IPS, by experience, no, they do not prevent logic errors easily, no? Especially for WAF. So I do a lot of testing on mobile banking and online banking, no? And a lot of this organization think, no, that if they have a WAF, they are protected against poor coding practices on the back end, and that we have been able to demonstrate it time and time again, no? We could bypass OTP. Once we're logged in, we could read other people's accounts. Legally, no, we are reporting it to them. They're paying us to to test their systems, no? So now they have uh, an eye opener that, yeah, even though you have all of this control, it is good. It is best to have this control rather than not at all, but it doesn't prevent uh, attack against logic and poor coding practices on the back end. For ORAN, security focus group, no, they have test specifications and recommendation, no? Again, they are advocating the use of robust protocols like SSH, TLS, IPsec, and they have specific versions and cipher suites and certificate management that they want, because you don't want, let's say, by generic recommendation of SSH, you could use SSH v1, which is now proven to be insecure, no? So they have a specific version that's usually it's the recent ones, no? That has been fixed with any known vulnerabilities, no, and has been designed with risk assessment in mind, no, that this could happen, so they need additional protection for this, even though it hasn't really occurred yet, no. Usually you get the latest version, and that's the recommendation from the SFD, the specs. Passwords, again, this is on your own, no? Robust password policies, resistance against brute force, and authorized resets. They're requiring you previously, penetration testing prior to deploying and regular basis, no? But this one is more regular, no? You would be required to have vulnerability scanning, no, at multiple levels, no? Infrastructure, application, and even fuzzing levels. And you'll have denial of service protection against all stack layers. Again, denial of service, there are usually two things, no? It's either you have a bad code that could trigger a bug, no, and cause an outage, no, on the other end, just by sending a malformed request. That is already a form of denial of service, because I could crash your system with the malformed request, and maybe via API, no, and the API did not have a use case, no, for these kinds of parameters, and it just conks out. I don't know what to do. I crashed. It does happen. Another type of denial of service, typically volumetric, but that would fall under the level of distributed denial of service, where a lot of hosts, likely in the internet, no, doing a lot of requests or maybe just sending you trash data, no, to overwhelm your routers and your links, no, and take you out of the network with that request, no. Because it's simple math, no. Let's say you have a 10 gig uplink, no, to the internet, and you have here 100 gig of trash traffic, no, arriving to your router. Of course, you're not going to be able to handle that. It's just basic math, no, and you would cause your legitimate users now not to be able to reach you. Uh, but there are solutions that in place for this, like scrubbing centers from Akamai or Cloudflare. No? But of course, they would add additional costs, and you'll have to design your network from the start with that risk in mind, and again, put compensating controls and many more areas, no, to be discussed. So with that, no, there are frameworks, no, like this one, Zero Trust Architecture. Never trust, always verify, and it was created by Stephen Paul Marsh, no, for his doctoral thesis in 1994, where devices should not be trusted by default, no? Even if they're connected to the same permission network, no? Such as a corporate LAN or in radio access network natin, it's gonna be the Open RAN network. Never trust a device. Always verify. Um, this is how you call this a thing nowadays, no? Because what I mean, let's put it this way: you're in a wireless network, Wi-Fi, no? In a coffee shop. Uh, you have your device, you know you're protected. You got antivirus, you got EDRs, you got patch, no? You connect to the Wi-Fi, and then some other guy connected to the same Wi-Fi. You're on the same local area subnet, but it doesn't actually have an antivirus. He's not patching his system. He's still running maybe Windows 7, a fresh install from 2016. That's dangerous. No? That machine could have, and it's downloading virus pirated games and movies. No? So very insecure device connected in the same local area network as you. That's not gonna be very comforting, at least for me, no. But the note here is, even if they were previously verified, no, what if that machine gets compromised? No, your machine is safe, but another machine in the LAN was compromised. No, so how would you trust all the requests coming from it? Hence, the zero trust architecture. Never trust, always verify. So this is we're doing away with traditional approach, no, of trusting device. No, um, we want zero trust for all modules in Open RAN, especially now that you're mixing and matching different vendors, no, for a RAN deployment. So even if I'm one of the vendors in an Open RAN component, no, I would be, of course, never trusting any API calls on my interfaces. I would always validate those requests and authenticate them, no, and authorize and check the authorization if they are actually allowed to do that. And of course, I'll have to do my own testing, no, for source code review. I'll have someone third party to do penetration testing on my component and have that report, no, submitted, that any vulnerabilities, if they were found, were remediated, or there were no critical vulnerabilities at that point of deployment. So that's gonna be my thing if I'm gonna be developing component from OpenRAN. No, and even if I am the developer for that component, no, and maybe the RAN deployment would require me maybe 10 or 15 or maybe 100 uh deployment box, no, of that. I will not still be trusting, no, the other modules, no, even though they are supposed to be able to come from me and communicating as intended, no. All the requests coming from the same device, no, that's just scaled, no, that I develop, I would have my boxes validate all requests. So for all we know, one of the box would have been compromised or manipulated by an insider, no? I want the other devices to be able to protect themselves against such attacks. So Principles and definition here. This National Cybersecurity Center identifies key principles for zero trust. Again, strong source of user identity. This is typically your IAM, Identity Access Management. Users must be authenticated. Machine must be authenticated. Additional context such as policy, compliance, and device health. This has something likely to do with maybe network access control, where you have an agent running on the box and checks, no, and communicates with the network access control and reports, no, saying that, okay, I am this box, I was patched last night, so I have antivirus and signature is updated, so please allow me access to the network. And once the network access controller validates that as based on policy and compliance, no, they would now give you access to the network. In contrast, no, another device, again, from the same vendor, just fresh from shipment from the box, no, you attach it to the network. The agent communicated to the network access controller and found out that, okay, you were last updated 6 months ago because, well, you were freshly manufactured, you just arrived. Your antivirus is, well, again, 6 months old, so they will not allow you to connect to the network yet. They might put that box on what we call a remediation segment and have you download all the patches, all the signatures, and apply it. No? And once you're ready, the agent would now start reporting back to the controller that, yeah, I'm ready. Please allow me to connect to the network. And that's the only time that the controller would allow that new device, no, to be part of the network. And even then, again, you got the older device, the new device, which are all both patched. No? Maybe they have a synchronization interface. No? Each and every one of them would be in self-preservation mode, and all of these requests would have to be still validated. Again, even though they're coming from the same vendor, uh, never trust, always verify, especially for API requests. Got authorization policies to access an application and access control policies now within the application itself. No? One thing that I have experienced, no, in a lot of systems now we tests is a lot of the developers have this misconception in security that once you are authenticated, you are authorized. So those are two different concepts actually. Authentication means presenting credentials to prove who you are. Authorization is what could you actually do once you are authenticated. So here's where we had problems where an authenticated user is able to manipulate the requests to maybe check out other account balances or account IDs, or even reset passwords for different account just by hitting the password reset policies and injecting the target username there. And the system, without authorization check, just validates now, okay, this request is coming from an authenticated user. No, he must be authorized. That's, again, two different things. That would allow just anyone with a credential to be able to manipulate your system. And let's say in the context of mobile banks, no, or banks, the barrier to entry for a valid credential for a mobile banking is maybe a 500 peso. No? You open an account, you want an online banking, then they would give you a valid credentials. And yeah, that is already within their system. That's authenticated within their system, but the authorization part has to be done on the back end. Are you allowed to access a specific account? But when you check, if it's implemented properly, when the system checks, okay, you are only authorized for this specific account balance, account numbers. Any other else, yeah, you get denied, and ideally there is a violation event, and it gets logged, and gets reported for investigation. That's the ideal scenario here. Okay. So for zero trust, we got the NIST SP 800-207 document, which is also good. 59 pages, very good read. But I would say for a typical mid-tier technical user, it might take 3 hours. No? Just an estimate. It's a part of reading here in our course. Next, we have, aside from zero trust, defense in depth. We want to defend a system against any particular attack using several independent methods. So this is a layering tactic conceived by the NSA as a comprehensive approach, no, to information and electronic security. So, uh, what they mean by server independent methods, like, well, let's say you have multiple firewalls. No? You have your network-based firewall to protect against those attack coming from the network, but your host would also have their own firewall, the host-based firewall. In case the attack passed through the network firewall, no, ideally your firewall will be able to defend against that attack that was allowed, no, the network-based firewall to be bypassed. No? So that's some sort of a layering tactic. And on your host, no, you will most likely have antivirus and EDR. So in case it passed through the network firewall, the traffic was allowed via the host firewall. When a threat actor was able to exploit a vulnerability and started dropping attack tools or malware, well, you're hoping, no, as another layer of security, no, in the host or application, no, an antivirus or an EDR would detect that anomaly. So again, you are passing through multiple controls. Uh, or the threat actor is trying to bypass multiple controls, and you're hoping that at least one of those controls would stop them, or if not, detect them as soon as possible. So that's what we want with defense in depth. And for that, no, let's say for controls, no, got here a diagram on what kind of controls we want. No, so of course you have, let's say, for the facility, no, you have physical controls where to do and have access to the IT systems. Now you got fences, you got guards, you got dogs, and in case they weren't able to detect it, no, there are CCTVs systems with multiple angle, no, per area, and no blind spots. Meaning, if you design I'm not sure if you have any of you have designed CCTV systems. No? So if someone goes through the door, typically you'll have two cameras, no, one from above, and then someone uh, another lens, no, coming from somewhere below. So just in case the guy with an evil intention entering your facility has a cap, and seeing the camera from the ceiling, no, they would have a cap cover their face, but not realizing that there's a pinhole camera somewhere uh, below, no, pointing directly at their face to identify them. But that's a good case before COVID. No, now I mean, when did you realize that you could actually go inside the bank with your face covered, no? And the guards will not uh, make a fuss out of it. But yeah, unlike that. So that's physical. For the technical, no, you got, of course, the firewalls, the AVs, the disencryption, no, file integrity authentication, that's part of it. Also have administrative, no. So in case it cannot be controlled with physical and technical, maybe you'll have a policy, no, for those, no, like you cannot bring home a laptop with critical data, not to minimize the risk of confidential data getting lost, but just in case, no, it gets lost, again, we are protected with defense in depth. The disk is encrypted, no? So anyone who would have gotten that laptop will not have any data of value to be extracted from it. Well, they could sell the hardware, and of course, the employee who lost it would have to pay and file a missing computing resource. No? But you're not now concerned, no, with data leaking out because, well, they have additional controls of this encryption. Um, Also want to ensure that there is proper guidance available in regard, no, to security and that regulations are met. And if there are any violations, no, it should be handled across the board. Well, there's no senior management is exempted. There's no more harsh policies for rank and file employees. No, again, if someone use, no, a pirated software, be it rank and file or a C-level position, they would have to acquire, implement this policy as again across the board without any regards, no, whatever your position is. Because if not, well, there's dole for you. No? Why is this policy only applicable to specific types of employee, but the senior management could do what they want? So you don't want that kind of discussion. Again, you want uniform protection against same level of protection across all networks. You have various protected enclaves, and this ties up with zero trust. No, you segment them, do microsegmentation if you could, and that enclaving or that segmentation would contain any damage to just very few computers, or rather than having them on, let's say you have 100 servers, you have them on one DMZ, one server gets infected, and guess what? You have the same passwords for all those servers. That's what the threat actor. They would laterally move across those servers, and if it's a ransomware, no, encrypt all your servers in one go. But if you have properly segmented and made sure, let's say, your credentials across servers are different, no? If a threat actor was able to get in one of your boxes, they most likely gonna be contained on that segment and on that box, and hopefully detect them immediately or in a short amount of time, so that the dwell time of the threat actor would be minimized, leading towards them not able to perform their actions or objectives, no? And just having the access and within an hour, no, them getting booted out. That's a good network to manage, I would say. For device in depth, they are also information centric, meaning identify where your critical assets and data are. Okay, and do the protection from there. So you don't want to protect, let's say, uh, a data center that doesn't have your critical information. And I mean, you need to protect that too, but it's gonna be a different level of protection for, let's say your beverage company, let's say Coca-Cola. You have a data center, but it does not contain the formula for Coke, no? So I would assume that it would have certain level of protection, but you would have a different level of protection for, let's say, your data center, which contains, no, the formula for Coca-Cola, no? Because again, that is their intellectual property, and they haven't released it, so it's not copyrighted technically. Because if you copyright it, you're gonna need to disclose, know what your formula is, so they cannot do that. So, but it's an intellectual property, and it's a corporate secret that needs to be protected. Otherwise, anyone could just create a Coke, and they would lose their value proposition in the market. So again, this is information centric. Also have threat vector analysis, where you focus, no, on shutting down entire vectors that could serve as carrier for threats. So sample, we are concerned with phishing. Our employees are just protected with the username and password. That's a ripe environment for phishing. You could easily get your employees victimized by phishing. So we want to shut down that service vector, or if we can, no, minimize that risk of occurring. So the best approach right now would be enable multi-factor authentication for all employees. Again, no exceptions. That would make it a bit harder for a threat actor to just fish you for a username and a password, and then able to use that credentials at any time they want. Now, if they fish you for your OTP, which could occur, they have a specific 30-second window to be able to log that in. And there are scripts to do that automatically for the threat actor. But now, even though they know how they have their username and the password, it could be as simple as killing all the sessions on a system. If you notice that we might be compromised, you don't have to do password reset for everyone immediately. Kill all the sessions, and the session of the threat actor with the initial OTP is now invalid, and they won't be able to get back to the system. They have to fish the OTP again, which I hope, no, the employee would not, or the user would not give out that OTP the second time around easily. No. But yeah, again, maybe a lesson learned here is even MFA could be breached, no, if it's not done right. There are cases which is very phishing resistant, like if you use a hardware token like YubiKey, not the RSA one, no, that still numeric, and you still leave the user to decide if the site is phishing or not. There are keys that does the challenge and response, no, in relation to the domain. So if the domain is a lookalike domain, the key will not work, no, or the math will not work, and the challenge and response for the MFA would fail. No? So take a look at YubiKey if you want that kind of protection. Now for this one, we got around 58 page, no, for discussion, no, on improving industrial control systems and cybersecurity with defense in-depth strategies. This is a good read. Again, 58 page, I would say maybe put around 2 hours here. Next, we have principles of least privilege. So again, we're combining a lot of this. No? So a fundamental concept here in computer security that user process and systems, no, should only have minimum permissions and access required to complete their task and function. And for a time, this is also already being implemented, let's say, in your mobile phones. So if you install an app, now they are prompting you, that I need access to the mic, I need access to your location, I need access to be able to call, no? But at least major mobile phone OS are requiring the apps to disclose that and you to give permissions, no? Because it's gonna look weird if a calculator would want that kind of access. So why would a calculator want access to my location? Could be a Trojan. Why would the calculator wants to access my phone calls? No? Now the user would be able to think. No? But same with any systems, and any systems I would design. I would have the bare minimum OS. Let's say for a Linux installation, it's gonna be the minimal distribution. No? If you take a look at, let's say, Ubuntu, no, you have your desktop, you got the server, you got the minimal. I would put it on the minimal and install the only required packages. The less software, the less vulnerabilities in that system. So that's basically the what principle of least privilege wants. No? And on the account side, no, why would you give uh, as a sysadd for backup, let's say, authorization to have a permission to manipulate domain controller policies. So that's going to be two different things, right? So if you're a backup team, you only have backup permissions. If you are on the policy team, you could manipulate the policies, but you cannot have backup permissions. So those also separation of duties on that aspect. Again, you want to minimize and detect any unauthorized access, any misuse, or in case those credentials gets compromised, they're going to be contained with that specific level of privilege only. And hopefully detect the anomaly with log analysis. So by limiting this access rights and privilege, we should be able to reduce the attack surface and the likelihood of exploitation. So if a user or process, they have more privilege than necessary, it could be maliciously misused, no, for those privilege, or even accidentally misused, no. So you don't want even the accidental part. And for the most part, no, there's a lot of accidental damage, no, caused by sysads because they weren't supposed to do this, but the permission was there in the first place that caused that issue, no, or misconfiguration. So again, minimize principle of least privilege. On the other hand, when users or process have only the permissions they need, na yung unintentional damage or deliberate exploitation is significantly reduced because they only do tasks specific to that permissions, no, of that system. Okay. Skip some. Let's proceed with CIS. So next discussion is CIS, Critical Security Control. So this was made by Center for Internet Security. No? It's a nonprofit entity that helps design guidelines and best practices for securing IT infra. And their latest version 8, was they basically want to uh, grab all this private companies, federal agencies, audit firms, in a room, well, not really specifically in a room, to discuss what kinds of controls could we put into organizations infrastructure and in our regards in Open Run deployment that would help prevent a large number of attacks. And they came up initially, this is a 20 critical security controls, no? They were able to compress and reduce it on their latest release last year to 18 critical security controls, and they have agreed that if we are implementing this in our environment, but this is not only applicable to Open Run, you could deploy this on your own environment as well. We would be better protected against nation states, APTs, financially motivated attackers, commodity malwares, and script kiddies. As mentioned, this is the former top 20 critical security controls. The recent version 8, they have um, able to collapse it into 18 controls. No? And here is an example of uh, a poster from CIS and a list of their 18 critical controls. If you take a look at it, it's actually very logical on why you would need this. And if you have to implement something, no, try to check the basic base controls. That's 0, 1 to 5. And take a look at this. The top 1 and 2 control is inventory of enterprise asset and inventory and control of software asset. So you need to have hardware inventory, you need to have software inventory. And that is security mode. Yes. How could you protect something that you do not know exists? You cannot do that. It is mandatory. You most likely have, hopefully, no, at least an Excel inventory in your environment. Um, but the problem with Excel is, when was it last updated? Might be 6 months ago, might be 2 years ago. So it's not current. So what you want here is, if maybe the benchmark, someone plugs in a workstation in your environment, ideally within 15 minutes, you should be aware that there is an asset that has been plugged and you could now identify if it's authorized or not. Uh, I think that's the goal. Other than that, maybe there is a vulnerability, let's say in Log4j, no? You should be able, with your software asset inventory, able to identify which asset has Log4j that is vulnerable and do the appropriate patching. If it's not patchable yet, do appropriate control that it's not exposed to the internet, or you have detection mechanisms at place in case something gets wrong, goes wrong on that system. So it looks basic. It is basic, but not a lot of organizations have even control 1 and control 2. So there's a lot more. You even have number 10, no? Malware defenses. Typically, this is where your EDRs or antivirus are coming in, no? And for most organizations that I've seen, no, their only control is the antivirus. And I would say that the antivirus is your last line of defense, no, in defense in depth, because that means it has passed through a lot of the scanners, the firewalls, and other defenses, and even the filtering, no, for whitelisting. And then the malware is now on your workstation. It was now being written to the disk. So it has to have bypassed a lot of those controls, and you're hoping that your antivirus is able to detect it. And we all know that antivirus detects most malware, but not all. So you don't want the threat actor deploying a malware that is not recognized by your antivirus. So that means they're gonna have a successful infiltration of your system. So there's that. And again, tying up with OpenRun, remember they are recommending penetration testing. It is part of the controls here, and this is the last one, 18 critical security controls. And they also have incident management, no, incident response management, because they do realize that security breaches and incidents would occur. You need to have plans on how to mitigate, no, or and perform incident response, no, in case the risk does occur. If you want to audit yourself, no, or ORAN, no, there is an audit script that is freely downloadable. Now you could do a self-assessment on your own, and you'll have here 18 controls per tab. And example here, no, they will just be answering, no, various controls here. Let's say for asset inventory, no, you have 1.1 to 1.5, and then you could check immediately, do you actually have policies that covers this? So that's already a realization na, okay, we're lacking policy for that, so we need to create one. And then once you have the policy, that's where all the controls and implementation is tied in. So what control should we input or buy a system now we should buy to comply with 1.1? Is it automated already and technically enforced? Are we reporting it to the business as part of our maybe system KPI? So you'll have a view here on where you are weak, where you are lacking, and then you'll have a score here per critical control. And the beauty is, oops, you'll have a graph on which control you are weak at, which control you are best at, and now you could have, with your limited resources, try to figure out with your team. I have X millions of dollars, I could only solve maybe 3 of this. But if I solve maybe control number 5, control number 8, control number 18, that would have more impact, no, than solving the other stuff. No? So you could now focus your resource for your best. And you now have a graph na you could present to management na, oh, 6 months ago when we started, we are at maturity level 1 with this course. Now that you have supported us with resource and personnel, we were able to increase our posture into maybe an improve upon maturity rating, which is good. And they now have a telemetry on how to reach a certain target, no? And what other resource na you could ask to. And you could say, no, that we are lacking still here, 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 and we need this amount of resource, and they could prioritize as intended. For this one, we have CIS. Now, you download the CIS critical controls. You just need to register. It's a good read with a detailed discussions on those controls. 87 pages for I would say 5 hours. Another best thing that came from CIS is the CIS benchmarks, where you would choose, no, the applications, the web servers, the OS that you're trying, or the switches, no, that you're trying to implement, and they would give you documentation on how to lock it down. So this is an example of Ubuntu CIS benchmark on how to lock down. This is, I think, 100 pages, na mistaken, just for Ubuntu alone. But this would guide you on how to have a very good lockdown and forensically ready workstations or server in case anything goes wrong. Again, you have to prevent it, but in case an attack, but in case something goes wrong, there is already auditability and forensics ready. No? The logs are there when you need it, in case you need to investigate. And of course, there's also external logging that's required for you to configure. In case the Ubuntu gets wiped or ransomware, ideally the logs were already shipped out in an instant, no, to a third party or external box within your environment. So this is one of the hands-on in our class. Now we're gonna require the students to install an Ubuntu, and then take a look at the recommended benchmark for that Ubuntu. Maybe we could use 2022.04 right now, no? And comply, no? Then they would also want them, no, to have an understanding of how a vulnerability scanner works. So you'll have two VMs. Now, one is a freshly installed, one is locked down with CIS, do an authenticated and unauthenticated scan, two methods, and then document the findings, now, which is actually more secure according to the vulnerability scanner. Okay.